Welcome to Unfiltered Finance. If you're tired of the financial illusions and ready for the brutal math, you are in exactly the right place. Let's dive in. March 2003. A brisk, ordinary morning in London. For Arthur, a factory worker, the Middle East felt like a world away. But on March 20th, the first coalition bombs fell on Baghdad. The UK committed 46,000 troops to the Iraq War. The official cost to the British taxpayer? A staggering £8.4 billion. But in macroeconomics, that was just the down payment. In economics, we call this the butterfly effect. A geopolitical shock 3,000 miles away was about to crash directly into Arthur's humble dinner table. You see, modern economies run on a highly fragile, interconnected web. And the main pumping artery of that entire web is crude oil. When instability hits the Middle East, commodity markets panic. Risk premiums skyrocket, and the men in sharp suits instantly reprice the future. Before the invasion, a barrel of Brent crude sat comfortably around $25. The global supply chain was well-oiled and predictable, but war destroys predictability. Fear of supply disruptions acts as an invisible tax, immediately inflating the cost of global freight. Even though the UK was a net exporter of oil in 2003 thanks to the North Sea, global commodity markets don't care about borders. UK energy companies sell at the international market rate. So, when global prices surged, the Bank of England faced an immediate imported inflation shock. For a manufacturing economy heavily reliant on logistics, this is a fatal blow. The cost of running machines and shipping goods quietly, ruthlessly multiplied. It wasn't just heavy industry. Small business owners like Sarah found their profit margins instantly crushed by skyrocketing utility and transport bills. Every item on a supermarket shelf requires fuel to get there. When diesel jumps, the cost of bread follows closely behind. Arthur didn't follow the commodities market. He just noticed that his weekly wage was suddenly, inexplicably, buying less and less. This was the beginning of the Petro-Punch. The first quiet wave of a massive wealth transfer from the working class to energy giants. The invasion of Iraq didn't immediately destroy global oil supplies, but financial markets trade on expectations, not just reality. Traders feared a regional contagion. If the conflict spread across the Middle East, millions of barrels a day could vanish. This geopolitical risk premium acted like rocket fuel. By 2004, Brent crude breached $50 a barrel. For Arthur filling up his battered car, the numbers on the pump were spinning faster, quietly siphoning away his disposable income. Meanwhile, corporate executives watched their equity valuations soar. An energy shock is simply a wealth transfer by another name. As prices climbed towards $80 by 2006, the foundational cost of running the British economy fundamentally shifted. The Bank of England was trapped. Raising interest rates would crush already struggling consumers, but keeping them low invited inflation. Then came the psychological threshold: $100 a barrel, a number that terrified policymakers but thrilled speculators. Winter approached. Heating a small, poorly insulated British home became a luxury rather than a given. Politicians pointed to the North Sea, promising domestic oil would shield the nation. This was an economic fallacy. Commodities are fungible. British oil was sold to the highest bidder on the open market, fetching the same premium as Saudi crude. The speculative frenzy peaked in the summer of 2008. Brent crude hit an astonishing $140. In just 5 years, the baseline cost of energy had multiplied nearly sixfold. Arthur's wages, however, had barely moved. This was the true Petro-Punch, a devastating right hook to the working class, masked behind complex global supply metrics. And as energy costs infected everything, the next domino was about to fall: the physical movement of goods. Globalization relies on one fundamental premise: cheap shipping. But a cargo ship's bunker fuel is directly tied to crude oil prices. As oil spiked, the cost to fuel a massive Panamax vessel from Asia to the port of Southampton quietly doubled. Then, add the geopolitical reality of the Iraq War. Marine insurance premiums for ships passing the Middle East skyrocketed overnight. Shipping cartels didn't absorb these losses. They introduced the bunker adjustment factor, a direct, non-negotiable fuel surcharge passed straight down the supply chain. By 2005, a standard 20-foot shipping container, the lifeblood of British retail and manufacturing, had effectively become a luxury metal box. The average cost to import that box from Shenzhen to the UK jumped from $1,500 to over $4,000. For Sarah, importing specialized baking equipment, or even basic packaging from abroad, suddenly destroyed her entire profit margin for the month. The UK economy operated on just-in-time manufacturing. Companies held minimal inventory, relying entirely on constant, cheap, and perfectly timed maritime deliveries. When that logistics chain fractured, Arthur's factory ground to a painful halt, waiting weeks for delayed, suddenly overpriced imported parts. The illusion of infinite, cheap global goods was shattered. The half-empty shelves at Tesco began to reflect the grim reality of maritime freight. In Westminster, the Chancellor watched the trade deficit widen uncontrollably. Importing basic goods was now actively bleeding the nation's capital dry. Yet, amidst the chaos, global shipping cartels quietly consolidated power. Even when oil prices briefly dipped, freight rates rarely came down. Faced with these insurmountable logistics costs, Sarah had only one survival mechanism left. She had to rewrite her price tags again. For Arthur, this meant the inflation wasn't just isolated at the petrol pump anymore. It was literally baked into his daily bread. The supply chain shock was complete. The macro-level freight crisis had successfully infiltrated the micro-level household budget, crushing local businesses in its wake. Small and medium enterprises, or SMEs, form the absolute backbone of the British economy. They employ 60% of the private workforce, but unlike massive multinational corporations, SMEs lack economies of scale. When global inflation rains down, they cannot easily absorb the massive shock. For Sarah, her commercial ovens became insatiable monsters. The sheer cost of natural gas to bake bread tripled overnight. Simultaneously, input costs exploded. Fertilizer requires petroleum. Tractors require diesel. Therefore, the simple sack of raw wheat flour doubled in price. This creates the ultimate SME dilemma. Do you raise retail prices and risk losing loyal customers? Or absorb the costs and go bankrupt? Sarah chose to raise prices. But Arthur, whose wages were stagnant, simply couldn't afford it. The transaction volume plummeted overnight. This is known as a margin squeeze. Revenue drops while operational costs violently expand. The mathematical reality is absolute destruction. Without margins, cash flow dries up. SMEs turn to banks for credit lines to survive, but commercial banks panic during crises. Credit dried up, yet fixed overheads like commercial rent are merciless. Landlords demand their exact monthly pound of flesh regardless. This is the literal definition of an economic squeeze. Crushed from above by inflation, crushed from below by fixed costs. Eventually, the math catches up. A business cannot run on negative cash flow indefinitely. The till simply runs entirely dry. After years of fighting an unwinnable macroeconomic war triggered thousands of miles away, Sarah was forced to pull the plug. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. Across the UK, traditional high streets began to board up their windows. The SME collapse compounded. When the foundational layer of small businesses caves in, it creates a massive vacuum in the national GDP and tax revenue. But the most devastating consequence wasn't lost tax revenue, it was the human cost. When companies bleed money, they must amputate. When businesses of all sizes are squeezed by inflation, they inevitably turn to their largest controllable operating expense: human labor. It rarely starts with mass firings. It begins silently with a hiring freeze. Arthur noticed the empty workbench next to him remained unfilled. Next came underemployment. Overtime was slashed. Then standard shifts were aggressively cut. The working class was quietly bled of their productive hours. Meanwhile, corporate boards used the crisis to restructure. The CEO justified massive layoffs as essential efficiency to appease nervous, demanding shareholders. In the UK, they call it redundancy. A polite, sterile, bureaucratic word that attempts to mask the violent destruction of a person's livelihood. For Arthur, the macroeconomic shockwave finally arrived in a small, polite envelope. His role in the supply chain was no longer economically viable. Losing a job during an inflationary spike is a unique kind of economic torture. Income drops to absolute zero, while survival costs exponentially soar. Even for those fortunate enough to keep their jobs, the reality was grim. Real wage contraction meant their unchanged salaries bought significantly less. Arthur returned to a freezing home. His meager severance pay was instantly swallowed whole by towering, monstrous utility bills and soaring food costs. This wasn't just Arthur. Structural unemployment spread like a silent virus across the industrial and manufacturing hubs of northern England. The entry-level door was slammed firmly shut. An entire young generation entering the workforce found nothing but locked gates and hiring freezes. The Chancellor attempted to calm the public with minor fiscal patches, but it was like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a shattering dam. A vicious economic cycle began. Unemployed workers stopped spending entirely, forcing more surviving businesses into bankruptcy, triggering even more devastating layoffs. Arthur walked the gloomy, chilling streets looking for work, only to find a towering, insurmountable wall of permanently locked doors. With his true income gone and essential survival costs rising, Arthur had only one desperate, dangerous option left to heat his home: debt. To survive without income, the working class turned to credit. But debt is a dangerous tool when facing absolute necessities: transport and warmth. Arthur still needed petrol to search for work. This exposes a brutal economic truth. Fuel for commuting is an inelastic demand. Inelastic demand means no matter how high the price spikes, consumers are forced to buy it. You cannot simply choose not to travel. Every trip to the forecourt became a strategic calculation. A 10-pound fill-up no longer moved the needle on his battered car's fuel gauge, but the petrol pump was only half the crisis. As the bitter British winter set in, the true nightmare began inside the home. Wholesale gas prices had surged in tandem with oil. For vulnerable demographics like pensioners, the temperature drop was quite literally life-threatening. Economists define fuel poverty as spending more than 10% of income on energy. Overnight, millions of UK households fell into this dark category. It created the infamous heat or eat dilemma, a horrific daily choice between turning on the radiator or buying enough food for dinner. The Chancellor blamed the international markets. The UK had shifted from coal to gas, making the grid highly exposed to global price shocks. Furthermore, the British housing stock was notoriously old and poorly insulated. Heat simply leaked through the walls, wasting precious, expensive energy. Meanwhile, the privatized energy firms passed the entire cost burden to the consumer, mailing out quarterly bills that resembled ransom notes. Arthur sat at his cold dinner table, wearing his heavy factory jacket indoors. The radiator remained off. He simply couldn't afford the click of the thermostat. When the final red-letter demand arrived, Arthur placed his glowing credit card on the table. He was borrowing at high interest just to avoid freezing. This is how short-term survival transforms into long-term financial ruin. Paying a utility bill with compounding credit card debt is economic suicide. The furnace was fed and the car was fueled, but the credit card was nearly maxed out, and Arthur still had to buy groceries. For a working-class family, the ultimate economic battlefield isn't the stock exchange. It is the sterile, brightly lit aisle of the local supermarket. Politicians often point to headline inflation, a heavily manipulated average index. They claim inflation is low, but the everyday consumer knows the truth. The reality is, modern food is simply disguised oil. Embedded in every apple is the cost of petroleum-based fertilizer, diesel tractors, and logistics. To hide these exploding costs from consumers, corporations employ a stealth tactic known as shrinkflation. It is a cynical magic trick of packaging. You pay the exact same £2, but you receive 2 fewer sausages, or a chocolate bar mysteriously missing a row of pieces. When premium goods become unaffordable, consumers downgrade. This is the substitution effect. Arthur stops reaching for the branded butter, seeking the generic. But inflation spares no one. Everyone else had the exact same idea. The cheapest value shelves were entirely stripped bare, like locusts pass through. Even worse, retail prices exhibit an economic trait called stickiness. When crude oil prices finally dip, supermarkets conveniently forget to lower their tags. For the working class, a simple grocery run morphs into a high-stakes calculus exam. Every item added requires another item to be sacrificed. And then comes the final judgment, the checkout till, a brutal machine that exposes exactly how far your real wages have fallen. There is a unique, quiet humiliation in asking the cashier to put the milk back because the total crossed your absolute spending limit. Even after rationing, cutting back, and trading down to generics, the final number on the screen is still impossibly, brutally high. For the third time this week, the toxic glow of the credit card returns. Now, Arthur is financing his literal daily calories with high-interest debt. He walks out of the store. A massive debt-fueled bill, resulting in a single, absurdly light grocery bag that won't last the week. Stealth inflation is the perfect invisible tax. Without ever passing a law, the system silently vacuums the remaining wealth from the bottom straight to the top. To the outside world, life carried on. But the working class was now surviving inside a fragile fortress of high-interest debt. From Westminster, the macroeconomic indicators looked remarkably stable. The Chancellor boasted of continuous GDP growth, entirely ignoring what fueled it. This was the ultimate macroeconomic magic trick, the credit illusion. Replacing lost real wages with easily accessible, highly dangerous consumer credit, the household debt-to-income ratio violently fractured. For the first time, ordinary people owed significantly more than they could ever physically earn. To keep spending despite skyrocketing fuel and food costs, homeowners began remortgaging. The British home was silently converted into an ATM. Retail banks, blinded by short-term profits, aggressively pushed subprime loans and credit cards onto consumers who were already drowning in inflation. For Arthur, the temporary relief of borrowing quickly mutated into an inescapable, crushing physical weight. The interest payments alone devoured everything. By 2007, the entire British consumer economy had transformed into a literal house of cards, built purely on unsecured household debt. This system functioned only as long as interest rates remained at rock bottom. But remember the inflation caused by the war? To fight that very inflation, the Bank of England finally had to raise interest rates. It was a pin pricking a massive balloon. In September 2007, the illusion shattered. Panic swept the nation as the first bank run in 150 years hit Northern Rock. The government watched helplessly. The subprime mortgage collapse was the brutal revelation that the economy was entirely hollow inside. For Arthur, the credit lines were instantly frozen. The glowing cards lost their magic, transforming immediately into inescapable heavy iron chains. The illusion of middle-class prosperity was over. The wealth wasn't real. It was just future poverty painted over with a shiny glaze. The inflation triggered by a distant war had cornered the working class into debt, and that debt ultimately brought down the global economy. But in economics, wealth is rarely destroyed. It is simply transferred. The financial crisis wasn't a loss for everyone. While Arthur froze, British energy giants reported historically unprecedented, record-breaking profits. The pain of the consumer was the ecstasy of the shareholder. And remember that £8.4 billion of taxpayer money spent on the Iraq War? It didn't just vanish into the desert sand. It was directly funneled into the pockets of defense contractors, private security firms, and weapons manufacturers. A phenomenal return on investment. For soldiers like Tommy, who returned with physical and invisible scars, there were no corporate dividends, only a quiet, underfunded reality. To pay for the war and the subsequent bank bailouts, the government introduced a devastating new macroeconomic policy. Austerity. Public services were gutted. Healthcare, infrastructure, and education faced brutal budget cuts to physically balance a ledger broken by institutional greed. To extract more revenue, stealth taxes like VAT were quietly raised. An aggressively regressive tax that disproportionately punishes the working class. This created a permanent chasm, a great macroeconomic divide separating the untouchable elite from the struggling, heavily taxed masses. Within a few years, the stock market fully recovered, rewarding those with capital assets, while Main Street remained a literal graveyard. As small businesses like Sarah's Bakery collapsed, massive multinational corporations swept in, buying up the prime real estate for pennies. Even Arthur's foreclosed home became a cheap, distressed asset for institutional investors. This is the ruthless efficiency of capital consolidation. The political promise of trickle-down economics was exposed as a mathematically impossible lie. The wealth only ever flowed completely upwards. From the petrol pump to the supermarket, and finally to the mortgage, The system functioned flawlessly as a massive extraction machine. The war in the Middle East was merely the catalyst. The ultimate victory belonged entirely to those who control the flow of capital. The government's official receipt for the Iraq War was presented to the public as a clean £8.4 billion. But the ultimate macroeconomic receipt, paid in lost real wages, evaporated savings, and suffocating compound debt, was completely incalculable. It was a masterclass in wealth transfer. The brutal socialization of macroeconomic costs and the absolute privatization of astronomical profits. This is the ultimate lesson of the butterfly effect. In a globalized system, war is always the greatest engine of inflation because for Arthur, Sarah, and millions of everyday people, the economy isn't just a chart on a screen. It is survival. We cannot stop global supply shocks, nor can we stop the relentless machinery of capital consolidation. But we can arm ourselves. Financial literacy is the only protective asset that cannot be inflated away or taxed by stealth. So, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Have you ever felt the silent, crushing squeeze of shrinkflation? Did a distant macroeconomic event ever crash unexpectedly into your personal household budget? Tell us your experience. If you want to stop being a casualty of the system and start decoding the financial matrix, hit that subscribe button now. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the hidden mechanics of the global economy. Leave a like if this video helped you see the bigger picture, and share it with someone who needs to understand these forces. The book on the 2008 crisis may be closed, but the ink is already drying on the next chapter of global finance. Always read the ultimate receipt. Until next time, stay sharp and stay informed. This video is for informational and educational purposes only, not financial advice. All investing carries risk of loss. Do your own research and consult a licensed financial advisor before making decisions. If you value the brutal truth over financial illusions, then hit subscribe today. To see how this math applies to your next move, click the video on your screen. I will see you there.